So lately on social media, I've seen all of these questions. What's EMDR? What's ART? And what's Brainspotting? So I thought I would take the opportunity to, differentiate, take a look at them. What's the differences? What are outcome measures? How long does it take to be trained? What's the retention rate? What are the costs of training? So in this video, we're going to take a look at all of those, compare them, and we're going to see which one comes out ahead. Now, all three of these therapies are referred to as experiential therapies, but only two of them are evidence-based, and that's EMDR and ART. Brainspotting is not evidence-based. However, the creator of Brainspotting credits EMDR for most of its protocol or its origin. So we can kind of lean on the fact that it's as close to evidence-based as we need to compare these three. Okay, so first, let's take a look at the categories that we're going to compare these three therapies in. First one is facilitation, and that's how they're administered. The next one is number of sessions, learning, or what the clients are asked to do, and then change, or what we hope for the client, closure and sustainment, or is their homework, pretty important, training time, and training costs. And then finally, success and completion rate. And we're also going to talk about any side effects of these therapies, if any. First, let's take a look at EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. There are numerous studies of the efficaciousness of EMDR, and it's been used for several years by the Department of Defense as well as the Veterans Administration. However, in recent years, there has been a shift from EMDR to cognitive processing therapy and exposure therapy in most VA systems across the country. EMDR has a few variations in the facilitation category, ranging from bilateral eye movements to buzzers to tapping. EMDR consists of 8 phases, from which phases 3 to 6 are traditional EMDR sessions. After establishing a good client-clinician relationship, and after the introduction of relaxation techniques, the client is asked to experience the traumatic event while following the fingertips of the EMDR therapist. Their fingers are moving in a horizontal plane, and the client is asked to follow the fingers back and forth on this horizontal axis. Now, the number of eye movements varies and is at the discretion of the EMDR therapist. EMDR is referred to as free associative, meaning that the therapist is going to ask the client to begin their process, and whatever comes up for the client, that's what the therapist is going to ask the client to go with. And as they go through their process, more than one psychological issue from the past could start to come up. That's why I guess they continue to work on coping strategies or strategies to deal with issues that might arise in between sessions because of the psychological unveiling of old traumas, more than one. Let's move over to ART's facilitation. ART is facilitated using what's called smooth pursuit eye movements. The ART therapist guides the client's eyes back and forth on a horizontal plane in sets of 40 hand movements. Like EMDR, ART is also evidence-based. It's been proven in 2 large cohort studies and 1 randomized controlled clinical trial to be highly effective at resolving PTSD symptoms in an average of 3.7 sessions. ART is derived from EMDR treatment, but is not EMDR, and it is a standalone therapy. It's more directive, more procedural, and easier to learn. It utilizes the same therapeutic elements as current gold standard psychotherapies for PTSD, including prolonged exposure, cognitive restructuring, narrative therapy, relaxation skills, and psychoeducation. ART goes one step further in helping patients rescript trauma scenes in a more positive way, modifying memory traces prior to reconsolidating, a technique on the cutting edge of trauma therapy. Now, the facilitation of Brainspotting, it's not quite as structured as both EMDR and ART's eye movements, but rather a fixed gaze that both the client and the therapist discover through trial and error using a pointer that the therapist moves in front of the client's field of view. Once the spot is discovered, Brainspotting theory suggests that there's a release of emotion that can be processed at the brain level. In Brainspotting, this is called focused mindfulness. The focused mindfulness ensues with the therapist closely and openly following along until the client comes to a state of resolution. All right, let's move on to number of sessions. Now, with EMDR, it's 8 to 12. Now remember, there's 8 phases, and I think phases 3 through 6 are actually EMDR sessions. So there's going to be several sessions to start your process with your client before you ever start doing trauma therapy. ART comes in a science-based 1 to 5 sessions with a mean of 3.7 for resolution. Many who use ART will attest that after just a single session of ART, clients make exponential change. The number of sessions needed in Brainspotting was harder to determine based on the limited data and lack of clinical studies, but internet and local providers' reports lead us to believe the number ranges from 3 to 6 to several sessions. Now let's move on to the change category. All 3 of these therapies have one thing in common. They're trying to trick the brain. Here's the whole premise behind it as I see it. If I'm moving my hands back and forth in front of a client's eyes while they're regurgitating a psychological trauma, there's a transfer that happens. And that transfer is from the limbic system to the cortex by way of the medial prefrontal cortex. Now, it's an executive functioning decision to move my eyes back and forth on a horizontal plane. Now, that executive functioning decision is ran by the PFC. And that medial prefrontal cortex is going to go dim or depleted in blood and oxygen if and when my client regurgitates a trauma from the past. Because the limbic system, as we're built, is designed to become hyper-aroused, shutting down the medial prefrontal cortex and arousing that limbic system. So all 3 of these are working on really the same premise. We want to continue to engage the medial prefrontal cortex while the client is regurgitating some kind of a psychological trauma in order to get a holistic working of the brain. And in doing so, we're able to process out things like sensations, emotions, and even images from past recollected events. So that the next time that the client thinks about it, it's like a book on a shelf. I mean, they don't get charged up, they don't get emotive. It just happened. It's just like a thing, like the word chair. It has no emotional response. It just is. Same thing with this trauma. Now, the differences between these 3 is systemics and how they're administered and how the client is prepared for the work that they're about to do. And of course, outcome measures says it all. At least it does for me. ART's closure. No homework. Why? Because ART has a beginning, a middle, and an end. ART is very systemic, procedural, and it's looking at a single scene. ART doesn't allow for the client to free associate and to open up other psychological traumas. We're looking at one particular scene from the beginning, the middle, and the end. And we're processing through the entire thing until it's complete. So no homework is necessary. Closure and Brainspotting. Is their homework? Well, everything that I research on Brainspotting tells me that this modality is used in adjunct to other modalities, such as talk therapies. And as a therapist, I know that I've given plenty of homework in cognitive therapies. So if I'm using Brainspotting in conjunction or in an adjunct to a talk therapy, I most likely am going to be giving my client some homework, but it doesn't have homework listed as a part of their process per se. So let's take a look at number of sessions again. We've got EMDR with 8 to 12. Remember, the first 3 sessions are processing and setting up coping strategies in the case that something happens in between session. And then ART, we've got 1 to 5 sessions with a mean of 3.5. Brainspotting, right now it's inconclusive. We just don't have the science to go to say this is exactly what we see. Now, local providers, the websites say an average of 3 to 6 sessions plus. So again, it isn't really narrowed down yet. In change category, EMDR, desensitization. Really, it's the same thing all the way through with these 3 categories or these 3 therapies. Desensitization, trying to change affect output, trying to alleviate the client from somatic responses by way of cues and triggers in their environment. That's really what all 3 of these therapies are trying to do. Homework, EMDR, no, but if something comes up, you need to use those strategies. With ART, homework, no. Brainspotting, homework, no again, but if it's being used in conjunction with other therapies, there might be homework along with that therapy. And then training time with EMDR, 6 days over 2 weeks. Training costs between $1,400 and $1,800, 10 hours of consultation, we'll just say, between $25 to $100 an hour, and then books anywhere from $75 to $90. With art, flat fee, $1,500. All training materials are included. And then Brainspotting, the training per training, which there's 4 phases, is $800 a piece, which comes to a total of $2,400, and then books and tools will range from $400 to $900. Okay, success and completion rate. EMDR, like we talked about, is 77 to 80% effective, but it has a dropout rate of around 40 to 60%. Art, same success rate, but we look at that completion rate is much higher. Now, statistically, we look at it, it says 80 to 94%, so that means we've got a 6 to 20% dropout rate with ART. And Brainspotting, just due to lack any research, we don't have any data, so we can't really be conclusive at this time as far as dropout or success rates or any of those. Side effects with EMDR, nightmares, somatic response, new traumatic events coming up in between sessions, and an increase of distressing memories. Now, let me skip over to Brainspotting. Brainspotting, mental fog, delayed or trouble forming speech after sessions, and lightheadedness. Now, Art's side effect rate or ratio is 0.7%. Less than 1% of people who engage in ART have side effects. Now, before I share any final thoughts, let me say this. Of these 3 therapies, only one therapy is a no-talking therapy. Now, what does that mean? I mean literally, no talking. Clients can come into therapy session, they can have a scene in their mind of the thing that they're most bothered by. The art therapist can walk them through the systemic process of ART step by step without asking the client about the details of their scene or hearing any words spoken by the client other than following the directions that the therapist is asking the client to follow. Now that in itself is unheard of. Think of the clients that we can help who can't, won't talk about their trauma, especially men who have been hurt in ways that they would never share with anybody. Now here's a modality that crosses all lines, even the lines of verbalization. They don't have to say it in order to get resolution these days. Now, when I look at this across the board, it's really quite obvious. I mean, art is faster, it's cheaper, it's easier on the client, it's more effective, has a higher completion rate, and no side effects, or very little. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. It was great to put this thing together. I'm glad that I took the time to educate myself, really, on these 3 different modalities so that I can understand them better, and I hope that you got something out of it too. Very soon, I'm going to be uploading a video on memory reconsolidation. So be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and we will see you on the next video. Practicing my cheerleading.